Welcome to tonight's college planning seminar on school visits and networking. So I am your host, Brendan Barnard. I'm joined tonight by Peaches Valdes, Dean of Admission and Financial Aid at Wellesley College. Welcome, Peaches.
Great. Thank you so much, Brendan. Glad to join you this evening.
Yeah, really appreciate it. And Peaches has been in the admission profession for a couple decades now and has worked at Hamilton College and Bryn Mawr College and now at Wellesley. So it is wonderful to have you here. And we'd love for folks who are zooming in to go into the chat and tell us where you're coming from. Put it in for all the everyone, not just panelists, so we know who's in the room. And we're going to be using the Q&A function on your Zoom display as well as the chat. So feel free to go in there and start entering questions as we talk. And we're really going to be talking primarily about college visits and networking and high school visits that colleges will do on your high school campus. Peaches, I want to start off with just kind of a question about visits on your campus. So what is the best question you've gotten from a parent or a student during a college visit?
The best question, I get a lot of questions, and so I think probably the best question I've received is actually from a parent. And it was interesting because I was not expecting to get the question. Usually I get questions about, what's the academic environment like? What are the professors like? Or, how will my child, navigate this process? And so the best question would have to be, how can I best support my child? And it's a very simple question, but when I hear it, it gives me a lot of insight into a family dynamic, in that's the parents or the guardians or whatnot are actually there to basically to support their student through this process. It's the giving them ownership and agency, giving their child agency over this process, and knowing that they're going to be there regardless of what happens, but that student is going to be the one who takes the initiative and takes ownership. So I think that's probably the best question I've received is, how can I best support my child?
So what are some of the answers you give beyond kind of empowering them to, have agency for it? What's a good response? Put you on the spot.
When I talk to families and when I answered that question, I said, I used to say that it's like being, teaching your child to drive a car. Like, you have to have patience during this process. You have to trust that the student is going to be mindful of this. Like, it's not like they're going to get in a car and start driving crazily or anything like that. They know they're going to follow the rules. They're even going to be more conscious than you think. And so you have to, there's a level of trust I feel that parents should have. There's also got to be a lot of humor. I think that this process can be really stressful for everyone. And so I think, bringing in some humor, bringing in some levity, showing that it's okay to, not like every school, like, knowing that in the end, the student's going to make a great decision. I think those are the types of things I've actually advised families to do, is just, be transparent, be honest, have those open conversations, know that your child, you've raised them well, that they are going to make good decisions based on how their upbringing has been. So that's
great. Well, and I, having just been through this with my son, both teaching him to drive and applying to college, at one point he had to say to me, Dad, you can let go of the oh crap handle, right? Like the handle. And I didn't know if he was talking about college or driving. So So what do you wish families would ask?
So I think it's more of that general sense of what are the possibilities. It's not about what's your biology department like. Like, don't ask those types of questions. That information is readily accessible on a website. You may want to flip the question and say, what are some really cool research opportunities that students have done? I think, the idea is, especially schools like liberal arts and sciences, research schools, we want to apply theory to practice. So you want to know that your student is going to get hands-on experience. So, I would flip the question saying, like, what type of cool research are students doing right now? are there, what are the types of classes, that maybe students are experimenting with that maybe that hasn't been part of their traditional set of coursework that they would have taken? How do students balance the academic and the social lives? Because yes, they are there for academics, they are there to be scholars. At the same time, this is such a pivotal moment in their lives that they're becoming adults, and maybe age-wise they're already adults, but the idea of really going back to that comment about agency and ownership, like this is when they're defining their voice as people, as functioning adults. And so you want to know, like, how is your student going to be able to do that? How are they going to balance that? Because I think, especially, in light of COVID and the impact of COVID, I think, I've received a lot of questions like, how are you, not just how are you going to support my child, but it's more of like, what are you going to do to help them like get up in the morning? Or who's going to tell them to do their homework? We're not doing that. Like that is not our responsibility. It's and so the idea is more of like, how are they going to find their own independence during that? And how are we going to, if are there resources available to help students kind of make their way into adulthood? Like those are the types of questions I would probably be asking.
That's great. That's great. How about, and I'll just invite those of you attending to put some questions in the chat. I see a couple of questions. We're going to focus right now for the bulk of things on college visits and networking, and then we'll try to get some of those questions towards the end about financial aid, things like that, if there's time. And we'll be actually having another college planning seminar on financial aid later in the year. So what about mistakes? What do you see? Like what kind of gaffes do you see families make when they do a college visit? What stands out to you?
So I wouldn't say that these are mistakes. It's just maybe not setting clear expectations during the process. Because in the end, we all make mistakes, even those of us in the profession, we always make mistakes. It's, we learn from them. This is how we do this. But
yourself.
Yeah, okay. So it's interesting because when I was, at the institutions I worked at, I always like to hang out at the front desk. No one knows who I am. I just kind of like observe and watch families have, I love observing families and their dynamics, especially during this very important process. It's when I see a family come into the building. They know the registration desk is there. There's a lovely person at the desk wanting them to register or check in. And automatically the student walks backwards, steps back, and the parents move forward and say, we're here to check in for our visit. Exactly. No, don't do that. And I don't think it's a mistake. I just think it's a missed opportunity for students to really, again, I keep on mentioning agency and ownership. Like this is the opportunity for the students to step forward and say, hi, my name is Peaches Valdes. I'm here for a visit. That's all they have to say. They don't have to engage in a long conversation. And then what they'll realize is that they'll end up having probably a lovely conversation with the people at the desk. They're going to, be welcomed, and there's a lot of focus on welcoming communities, and so they can ask questions. But, I think those are some of the things that I would encourage students to take advantage of, is those little acts. So if, once, now that we have college fairs coming back, in-person college fairs at a lot of places, and if it's students and families, I would have the student walk to the table and say, I'd like to learn more about your school. It's odd when an admission officer is standing at the table and a parent walks forward and says, we want to study biology. Mm-hmm. Or we're taking the SATs, or should we take the SATs? And I'm like, well, actually, no, you shouldn't take the SAT. Your child should consider it. But I mean, again, it's one of those things where, I know it's an automatic reaction of a parent to step in and want to make sure that they put the best foot forward for their child. But in the end, it's really up to the child. And most often than not, the student's going to be perfectly fine doing it. That you just need to kind of push them forward a little bit.
Yeah, and as a parent, it's actually fun when you step back and just watch your child kind of go through that, right? And it just be an observer. I think you learn a lot about them.
I've actually had cases where parents, after the student has come to talk to me, the parent comes up and says, "I'm so glad they did it on their own. It was really nice watching them." So it's definitely, there's a lot of pride in it.
Yeah. What about missed opportunities? Families that go visit a school, and they do the tour and they do the information session, but what are missed opportunities when they're on campus?
Missed opportunities, I think, really, honestly, it really depends on what the school's policies are. I think that schools are um, still, adapting to, masking and COVID policies and whatnot. And so if things are open for students, I would always encourage, if possible, step into the student center, a campus center. Those are central locations where many students are. And so you can walk in there, you can get to see how students engage with one another. You can hear conversations. It's like it's the watering hole, basically. It's where everyone is coming together, or a dining hall. You get to have a meal, you get to talk to students. The idea is just to be that observer and see if the student can see if they can envision themselves being in that space. So I think those are definitely missed opportunities, especially if it's available. You sometimes want to go off the beaten path. I always encourage students and families, if possible, grab a school newspaper. Like you can read it online, of course, but it's always great to grab one, in your hands, and read what's going on within the student population. So it's just a little bit to learn that's not part of the traditional tour or the information session.
Yeah, I'd like to recommend they do that before the tour and information session, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So if they can follow up on things they might have read in the paper that kind of they had questions about, or seemed off, or were exciting, or I also really like the idea of going to a place on campus, like behind me in this picture here in my backdrop, and look lost, right? Like look lost, look around, maybe look at your phone, or and see how long it takes somebody to stop and ask if they can help you, right?
Exactly.
That's a lot about a campus community, and it says a lot about a campus community if people are walking with their heads down on their phones, or they're doing what they're doing. So yeah, that being an observer is great. So let's turn a little to kind of networking, right?
Yeah.
How would you recommend that students kind of use their networks, their existing networks, to find more out about a college?
So the students are going to have multiple networks. They're going to have their school counselors that are going to be working with them. They're going to have their their teachers. They're going to have other school administrators that are mentoring them. They may have coaches or supervisors for jobs. I think it's interesting because it's a really simple question, but there's so many different ways that people can approach it. And so the best way is just to simply ask. Like, there really are, I think sometimes individuals feel like they don't want to get embarrassed. They don't want to ask like a dumb question or an uninformed question. And in order, the way that I think about this is that this student and this family they are making a decision on a future investment in their students' education. Like, you need to be thorough. You need to ask questions. You need to talk to people. Like, you would not purchase a home or hire a babysitter or a dog sitter or whatnot without looking at references. Like, you want to know that people can connect, and you want people to provide additional information. So I always just say, ask the question, use your resources to learn more about a college that way. And especially if you work with your school counselor or any type of advisor who's helping you through this process, they're going to have a lot more resources, whether it's, various websites, whether it's, oh, I have a friend whose son or daughter is going to that school, or, my friend is an alum, or I'm an alum, or whatnot. But the idea is just simply to ask that question. You want to ask, when in doubt, you always want to you curate some questions in advance, like talk about student life and academics. You don't want to go into it just saying like, tell me about X institution, because there's so many different directions you can go with that. But maybe you can ask the question of your network, saying like, where can I learn a little bit more about the academic opportunities or the social communities or what their alums do after graduation. So I think you're just asking the question and knowing that you want to be a little bit more structured in doing it so you can get the answers that you need. And what I would also recommend is that you ask the same questions of, all the institutions, based on your network. Like, because if you ask the question about what's the type of, what do alums do at X institution, you want to ask that at every school to see how the responses differ or maybe are the same.
Yeah, and ask as many people as possible to see if you get the same answer, right? Ask a student, ask an alum, ask a parent of an alum, or as many people as you can kind of get a perspective on. But I think it's also important to think about the idea that is just that, a perspective, right? That you have to take everything with a grain of salt, and that somebody's experience is going to be really different than yours might be.
Right.
But I think, yeah, I mean, another question could be, what was the highlight of your experience for an alum? What was the highlight of your experience at the college, or what do you wish was different about your experience? And also keeping in mind how long ago the person went there, right? Like
Exactly.
The school I went to and the school you went to are probably very different places than they were 30 years ago or whatever.
Oh, absolutely.
So. What about kind of contact with admissions officers?
Yeah.
How much should students be engaged with their admission officer? How much is too much? Parents, all that.
So this is for parents. I would say rarely will you contact the admission officer, because unless, I can't even imagine what the questions would be that the parent would be asking. It might be a question in terms of financial aid. And so if that's the question, because, you form a connection with the admission officer. And so there may be a different process. And so I could see a parent asking specifically about, financial aid, or, how do we connect with the alumni network or career services, things like that. But for the most part, it should be the student contacting the admission officer. And in terms of the frequency of doing it, it's not going to be an everyday thing. It's not going to be, may not even be a once a month thing. You usually just want to contact your admission officer if you require clarification, whether it's about the application process, or, maybe you've scoured the website and you can't find information about a specific professor or study abroad opportunity. They can help direct you to the right people. I think some students take advantage of it, especially if they've had a really great visit, they want to be able to share that with someone, saying like, Mr. Barnard, I visited your college and I had such an amazing time. I just want to tell you why I would be a really good fit and why I felt like I could see myself on X campus. So those students will take those advantages to do that, which is really great, because that adds a lot more context. It gives us insight into the student, and it shows like the student has done their research. They've shown us that they really want to be on our campus. It gets to a point where if you start emailing every day saying like, this is what I did today, or this is one award every year, every day is a different award, that's a little too much, and really not adding anything.
Yeah. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
What about kind of high school visits? So your team is probably out visiting a number of high schools all over the country. And what role do those visits, where admission officers will come and have an information session or something like that, what kind of role do those play in the overall process?
Right. So with the high school visits, it's a point of contact. So it's you can meet in person or virtually the individual who's going to be assigned to your school, who will be reading your application, who will be your advocate in the committee. And so it's always, a great opportunity. We also know that students, the last 2 to 3 years have not been normal, and whatever normal is now. And so some schools may limit the number of high school visits a student can actually participate in because they need them to be in class. And we want you to be in class. If your school that you're interested in is going to be in your high school doing a visit, and you can't go because you have a big test or you have a big project coming on, that's a great opportunity for you to email the admission officer in charge of your school and say, Mr. Barnard, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to attend your visit, but because I have a physics study group at that time. That's but please know that I'm really interested in your institution, and I look forward to working, learning more about the process over the coming months.
Yeah.
That's a really great email because it shows that you would have attended had you had the opportunity. And so the high school visits, it really depends also on the time frame. Like some of them are like 20 minutes, some of them are 40 minutes or a full block period. It's an opportunity for an admission officer to share information, and usually it's general information. It's just like a general overview of the school. If you have the opportunity to be in more of like a one-on-one, it's more of a conversation. It's about like, okay, let's go back and forth. Let me tell me what you're interested in. I'm going to tell you how it would be a really great for my school, a great fit for my institution. So it's a learning opportunity. It's not evaluative in any sort of way, but it's about it's kind of like that network, like asking those people questions about what makes your institution distinct and why you would be a good fit in the end for it.
That's great. And I mean, so in terms of self-advocacy, right, and this experience, if a student is interested in a school, say a young woman is interested in Wellesley, and there's no plans for a rep to visit their school. What do you think about them reaching out and sending an email to their rep saying, I'm really interested. If you're in the area, I'd love for a visit to our school. I mean, do you have that?
Yeah, it really depends on the school. Sometimes there might not be the opportunity. And if that's the case, if the student says, will you be able to do a visit to my high school? The admission officer will be clear and say, like, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to, but however, please keep in touch with me, or why don't we schedule a Zoom call instead? So there might be a different opportunities that you can connect with that admission officer outside of the high school visit. It's interesting because we're still, just like students and everyone around the country and the world, we're still in a hybrid phase. So some schools are clearly only doing virtual visits and others are only doing in person, and some are like, we'll do both, but it's not as many opportunities. So it's really up to the school. And what I would recommend students do is if they want to know if a college or university is visiting their high school, they should go to their school website. They should go to their school counselor, because all of that gets recorded. So they all get scheduled on a calendar and they should have access to it. And if they realize like, oh, wow, Wellesley not visiting or Hamilton's not visiting or whatnot, then what they can do is they can send an email out to the admission officer saying, I saw that you're not visiting campus. Will you be visiting in the future? And if not, can I just keep in touch with you should I have any questions? And we will never say, no, you can't contact us. Well, for us, it's another opportunity to connect with the student and learn about them as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a life skill, right? It's this networking piece and building relationships, and I think it's important for students, even if the admission officer can't visit, to make the effort, right, and to show the initiative. So that's great. And there's also I'll just draw people's attention to there's some tiny URL here for some resources on college visits in the chat if people want to click on that and take that away. So you mentioned kind of talking to those admission officers when they're on campus about what makes their school distinctive. Mm-hmm. How can they start to distinguish between similar schools? I mean, as you probably know, some rankings came out this week, the college rankings, and that is not the way to distinguish between schools. I'll say that. But a lot of families are left saying, okay, I'm looking at a small liberal arts school or a big state school or this kind of school. I see a bunch of them, but how do I distinguish?
Well, one, I would definitely go to your school counselor. If you have, go to your school counselor's office to see what resources they have. There is my niece is actually a junior, so she's starting this process right now, and she has the FISC guide, and so she's actually going through it just to get a sense of what schools are out there, what sounds interesting. If you are in an area that is more suburban and urban, what I would do is start looking at the schools around there. And it's not necessarily that you're going to go there. It's just that there's such a diversity of institutions. So, where I'm located, right outside of the city of Boston. So I'm in the suburbs. There are so many different colleges and universities in the area of different sizes and different types and focus. And, and what you could do is you could just start picking some of those and just getting a sense of like, okay, if I'm going to visit Wellesley, this will give me a little, enough information about what it's like to be on a suburban, small liberal arts college for women. Or a larger university, what is, you can start looking around in the vicinity and just try to cherry pick some schools just to get a sense of what the environment is like, and then maybe branch out farther, and during a vacation or during a break, visiting other schools. I will tell you that once you start looking at them, if you're looking at a lot, they all start blending together. They all look like ivy colored walls and students reading under trees kind of thing. So when you actually get to the point where you're doing college visits, I recommend documenting it. So it could be taking photos and making little notes about every single one that stood out. Like, again, kind of what we were saying earlier about asking colleges questions and making sure you ask the same question at every college. I would do the same. Ask the same set of 3 to 4 questions at every single school. Capture that information with a photo of the school so you know which ones you went to, like put it on a Google Doc or a Google Sheet. And then from there you can say, okay, here are the 4 questions I asked. Here's a picture of what the school looked like. Here are what the responses are. I know it's a little organized, like extremely organized, but that's kind of how my brain works. And I'm a visual person. Like I love the photo because it's a trigger and it reminds me of like, oh, I remember that day it was super cold, or like, oh my gosh, it was beautiful. And then you have all these questions that kind of support that photo of what the type of environment is. And then you'll start being able to distinguish each school from one another as you go through this process.
Yes, you will thank Peaches later if you do that.
Yeah.
So one last question as we wrap up here, and it was about financial aid. So I just want to, we're going to kind of shift gears here for just a second. And Andrew asks, is there an advantage to filling out the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, early? It says, I heard that grants are handed out on a first come, first served basis.
So just remember that the FAFSA is based on federal aid. So so you have to think about it in that context. Whereas if you're thinking about grants, people tend to think about it in grants and they equate it to also merit. Those are institutional based. So you'll get that information from the school itself. I mean, it's always good to start early in the sense of submitting the preparing and documenting the application, but you have to remember that a lot of the information is going to be provided by your parents. So it's really depending on when they, for example, file their taxes, because they'll need that information. So I think it's always good to start early. Every school will be different in terms of, there's always the same deadline, but there is going to be, every school will have its own set of directions. But when in doubt, it's, to be informed in the process, I would always encourage students to start looking at the forms early and start pulling together the materials, because you don't want to get to the point of the deadline and you're like, oh, wait a second, I need all this. I need my family to provide me all of this information. You need to be able to build more time into it.
Right. But for federal aid, just like admission, right? It's not like if you apply on September 15th, rather than September 20th, you're getting first in line or something like that. And it's the same thing, admission, right?
Correct, right, correct.
Well, Peaches, you're so kind to be here with us. Thanks for all your insight. And we're holding these college planning seminars every other Wednesday. So in 2 weeks on September 28th, we'll be joined by Whitney Soul from the University of Pennsylvania, and she's going to be talking about essays and supplements. So I think there's a link in the chat to register for that. Thanks so much again for joining us, and have a great night.